Have you ever wondered what it truly meant to be a soldier in the Roman Empire, wielding weapons that were not just tools of war, but instruments of sheer domination? The Roman legions were not just about brute force. They were a carefully crafted machine of discipline, strategy, and lethal efficiency. At the heart of their success were the brutal and ingenious weapons they carried, tools designed to break enemy lines, create fear, and conquer vast territories. These weapons were not flashy or ornamental. They were practical, deadly, and refined through centuries of battlefield experience. The Roman soldier's arsenal reflected a balance of power, precision, and psychological warfare, making their approach to combat as ruthless as it was methodical. The first weapon that comes to mind when thinking about Roman soldiers is the iconic gladius. This short sword was not designed for show, but for stabbing. Swift, brutal, and unforgiving. Unlike the sweeping strikes of longer swords used in other cultures, the gladius excelled in close quarters, especially within the famous Roman formations where soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder. With about 20 inches of double-edged steel, the gladius was perfect for thrusting into the enemy's gut, maximizing damage with minimal effort. Its design was so efficient that it became a symbol of Roman military power, the sword that helped build and defend an empire spanning continents. But the gladius was only one piece of a much larger arsenal. Another equally important weapon was the pilum, a type of heavy javelin that Roman soldiers would hurl at the enemy before closing in for hand-to-hand combat. Unlike typical spears, the pilum's design was a clever mix of simplicity and deadly purpose. Its iron tip was intentionally made soft, so that when it struck an enemy's shield, it would bend, making the shield useless and forcing the enemy to discard it or fight with a compromised defense. This tactical advantage disrupted enemy formations and created chaos just before the brutal melee where the gladius took center stage. The pilum was more than a weapon. It was a strategic tool meant to weaken the enemy's first line of defense. Roman soldiers also carried a variety of other weapons that contributed to their battlefield dominance. The pugio, a small dagger often worn as a sidearm, served as a backup weapon for close combat or emergencies. Though smaller than the gladius, it was sharp and reliable. Then there was the scutum, the large rectangular shield that was essential not just for defense, but for offensive maneuvers like the testudo formation, where soldiers formed a protective tortoise shell with their shields. The combination of these weapons and tactics allowed Roman soldiers to maintain control in the chaos of battle and emerge victorious more often than not. One of the lesser-known but equally brutal Roman weapons was the spiculum, a spear that evolved from the pilum and was used in the later phases of the empire. It combined features of a spear and a javelin, giving soldiers a versatile tool for both throwing and thrusting. The spiculum showed how Roman weaponry adapted over time, reflecting changes in enemy tactics and the evolution of warfare itself. Alongside these weapons, soldiers also relied on armor like the lorica segmentata, a type of segmented plate armor that provided excellent protection while allowing mobility. Together, these weapons and armor made Roman soldiers a terrifying force on any battlefield. Roman military success was not just about individual weapons, but how they were integrated into a cohesive fighting style. The legionaries' training emphasized discipline, formation fighting, and coordinated attacks. Each weapon had a role to play, from the initial volleys of pila that disrupted enemy shields to the deadly precision of the gladius in close combat. Even the psychological effect of their weapons, the imposing sight of rows of soldiers with shining swords and massive shields, played a part in their dominance. Understanding these brutal weapons helps us appreciate not just Roman military technology, but the mindset of a civilization built on conquest and control. As we delve into the 10 most brutal weapons Roman soldiers wielded, we will uncover the story behind each one, how they worked, why they were so effective, and how they contributed to the Roman Empire's unparalleled military legacy. From the feared gladius and pilum to lesser-known but equally deadly tools, this exploration will reveal the harsh realities of ancient warfare and the ingenuity that made Roman soldiers some of the most feared warriors of their time. So, let's begin this journey into the brutal arsenal of the Roman legions, where every weapon tells a story of strategy, survival, and ruthless efficiency. The gladius, as mentioned, was the quintessential Roman sword, but its brutal effectiveness came from its very design and the combat style it enabled. Unlike the sweeping cuts favored by many swordsmen in other cultures, the gladius demanded precision stabbing. Roman soldiers trained rigorously to strike quickly and decisively, delivering lethal thrusts aimed at vital organs. This close-quarters fighting style was perfectly suited to the Roman legion's famous formations like the tudo or testudo, where soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields interlocked like the shell of a tortoise, providing near impenetrable defense. In such tight ranks, slashing was impossible, so stabbing was king. The short length of the gladius allowed soldiers to maneuver their blades in confined spaces between their own comrades' shields, maximizing damage without risking their own safety. Beyond its practicality, the gladius symbolized the Roman soldier's identity, a weapon that was as much about efficiency as it was about psychological dominance. It was designed not for show, but to instill fear and deliver swift, fatal wounds. The double-edged blade, usually around 18 to 24 inches long, was made of strong steel capable of cutting as well as piercing. Roman blacksmiths constantly refined the blade's quality, ensuring it could withstand the rigors of battle without breaking or dulling quickly. The hilt was often simple, made for a firm grip, sometimes adorned with basic decoration or personal insignia, but nothing too flashy. This was a weapon of war, not a ceremonial piece. Moving from the sword to the spear, the pilum was one of the most innovative and strategically important weapons in the Roman arsenal. It might look like a simple spear, a wooden shaft about 6 feet long topped with an iron tip, but the devil was in the details. The pilum's iron head was deliberately made of a softer metal that bent on impact. This design was genius because once the pilum hit an enemy shield, it would bend and become nearly impossible to remove. This meant the enemy soldier either had to drop their shield and fight defenseless, or fight with a shield that was unwieldy and compromised. Either way, the pilum inflicted more than just physical wounds. It shattered the enemy's defense and morale before the Roman soldiers even engaged in close combat. Roman legionaries typically carried 2 pila into battle, and the initial volley of thrown pila was a hallmark of Roman tactics. At the start of an engagement, soldiers would hurl their pila en masse, creating chaos in the enemy ranks and softening their lines. Then, with their shields ready and gladius drawn, they would advance to finish the fight. The pilum's role as a disruptor cannot be overstated. It was the perfect example of Rome's emphasis on combined arms and battlefield control. This weapon was more than a spear. It was a tool of psychological warfare, designed to break the enemy's rhythm and force them into panic. Another brutal weapon that Roman soldiers carried was the pugio, a short dagger used both as a tool and a weapon for close combat or last resort defense. Although smaller and less glamorous than the gladius, the pugio was a deadly companion in the chaos of battle. It could be used for quick, lethal strikes or even for silent assassination during covert operations. The pugio's blade was sharp, double-edged, and often ornately decorated, reflecting its dual purpose as both a functional weapon and a symbol of status for the soldier who bore it. While many think of the pugio as a backup weapon, its importance on the battlefield cannot be underestimated. It was a soldier's reliable last line of defense when the main weapon was lost or broken. Beyond individual weapons, the Roman soldier's arsenal included powerful defensive gear that also played an offensive role. The scutum, the large rectangular shield, was as crucial to Roman success as their swords and spears. This shield was made of layered wood, often curved to better fit the soldier's body, and covered in leather or metal to increase durability. Its size allowed soldiers to form formidable walls of defense, especially in the famous testudo formation, where the shields of multiple soldiers locked together to protect against arrows, javelins, and other projectiles. The scutum was not just a passive shield. Soldiers could use its edge to bash opponents, break enemy lines, and create openings for their gladius strikes. One of the more subtle but effective weapons in the Roman arsenal was the spiculum. Emerging in the later periods of the Roman Empire, the spiculum evolved as a hybrid spear designed to replace the pilum and offer versatility. Unlike the pilum, which was primarily a throwing weapon, the spiculum was effective both as a thrown javelin and as a thrusting spear in close combat. This adaptability reflected changes in warfare tactics as Rome faced new enemies and different battlefield challenges. The spiculum's design varied, but it typically featured a longer, more robust shaft with a broad, sharply pointed head for deeper penetration. Soldiers who mastered the spiculum could engage enemies at a distance and then switch to stabbing when the lines closed. Roman armor was just as much a part of the soldier's offensive and defensive system as their weapons. The lorica segmentata, a type of segmented plate armor, was the hallmark of Roman legionaries. Made of overlapping iron strips fastened together, it provided superior protection without sacrificing mobility. This armor protected vital areas while allowing soldiers to move freely, swing their swords, and maintain formation integrity. Its design was revolutionary for its time and showcased Roman engineering skills. A well-armored soldier wielding a gladius and pilum was a nightmare for any opponent. The Roman military was not just about individual weaponry, but about the integration of these tools into a sophisticated system of combat. Training was rigorous, emphasizing discipline, coordination, and teamwork. Soldiers drilled repeatedly on how to use their weapons effectively, how to maintain formations, and how to exploit the weaknesses of their enemies. Their weapons were extensions of their will and discipline, not just instruments of violence. This synergy of weapon and soldier created a military machine that conquered vast regions and maintained control over a sprawling empire for centuries. Psychological warfare was an often overlooked aspect of Roman armament. The sight of a legion advancing in perfect formation, shields locked, pila flying through the air, and gladiae ready to strike was enough to intimidate many foes before a single blow was dealt. The weapons themselves were designed to be brutal, but also to send a message. Roman soldiers were organized, relentless, and deadly. They were the embodiment of Roman power and the brutal efficiency that defined one of history's greatest empires. As we continue to explore the 10 brutal weapons that Roman soldiers wielded, it's essential to understand how each weapon was not only a tool, but also a reflection of Rome's military philosophy: practical, disciplined, and deadly. From the stabbing gladius to the bending pilum, from the versatile spiculum to the compact pugio, each weapon tells a story of innovation driven by the demands of conquest and survival in the brutal realities of ancient warfare. Together, they formed a comprehensive arsenal that allowed Roman soldiers to dominate battlefields, crush rebellions, and expand one of history's greatest empires. Another weapon that exemplifies Roman brutal efficiency was the scorpio, a type of ancient artillery designed to launch bolts or large arrows at enemy troops or fortifications. The Scorpio was essentially a smaller, more mobile version of the ballista, a powerful torsion-powered siege engine. Unlike the handheld weapons of the legionaries, the Scorpio was operated by specialized engineers and provided long-range firepower that could devastate enemy ranks before the main force engaged. Its precision and penetrating power were remarkable for the time, capable of piercing armor and causing chaos among enemy soldiers. The psychological impact of artillery like the Scorpio cannot be overstated. The thundering sound and deadly projectiles sowed fear and confusion long before close combat began. Roman soldiers also used the plumbata, a less well-known but deadly weapon. Plumbatae were weighted throwing darts carried by infantry as a supplementary ranged weapon. Compact enough to be carried in bundles attached to a soldier's shield or belt, these darts could be hurled with surprising force and accuracy, piercing through light armor or shields. Their aerodynamic design and weighted tips gave them both distance and lethality, allowing Roman troops to disrupt enemy formations and inflict casualties from afar. Though not as famous as the gladius or pilum, the plumbata was a clever addition to the Roman infantry's arsenal, offering a deadly edge before the melee began. The Roman army also utilized various forms of slings and sling bullets, small lead or stone projectiles hurled at enemies at high speeds. Slingers were often specialized troops or auxiliaries trained in the deadly art of projectile warfare. Their skill with the sling allowed them to harass enemy formations, pick off key targets, and weaken morale. Sling bullets were sometimes inscribed with messages or symbols intended to intimidate or mock the enemy, adding a psychological dimension to their physical damage. Though simple in design, the sling was an effective weapon that complemented the Roman army's combined arms approach. In addition to their offensive weapons, Roman soldiers were equipped with defensive gear that could also be used as weapons. The pilum and the spiculum were often paired with the scutum shield, which was not only a defensive barrier, but also a tool for offense. Soldiers could use the edge of their shields to bash enemies, creating openings to strike with the gladius or thrust with the spiculum. The shield's weight and size allowed it to absorb blows while also becoming an extension of the soldier's offensive capabilities. This dual functionality of defense and offense was a hallmark of Roman combat effectiveness. Roman engineers and blacksmiths continually refined their weapons, often responding to the challenges posed by Rome's enemies. For example, as cavalry threats increased, spears like the spiculum were designed for better reach and versatility to fend off mounted attackers. Similarly, heavier pila with longer shafts were developed for more powerful throws that could penetrate thick armor or horse hides. This constant evolution ensured that Roman soldiers remained ahead of their foes in both technology and tactics. Another brutal weapon that deserves attention is the ballista, a massive siege engine that could hurl enormous bolts or stones with devastating force. Unlike handheld weapons, the ballista was operated by teams of soldiers and engineers during sieges or large-scale battles. Its range and power made it ideal for breaking down fortifications, killing groups of enemy soldiers from a distance, or causing panic among enemy ranks. The ballista's bolts could penetrate armor and shields, and its thunderous firing sound added to the terror on the battlefield. While not carried by every soldier, the presence of ballistae on the battlefield was a critical factor in Roman military dominance. Roman soldiers also had to be prepared for close-quarter brutal combat, where grappling and use of improvised weapons could decide life or death. The military training emphasized not only mastery of their standard weapons, but also adaptability, using whatever was at hand, from stones and clubs to broken spear shafts. The Roman emphasis on discipline meant soldiers could maintain formation and composure even under chaotic conditions, turning even crude weapons into effective tools for survival. Another weapon that reflected the brutality and practicality of Roman warfare was the hasta, a thrusting spear used primarily by early Roman infantry before the widespread adoption of the pilum. Though eventually replaced, the hasta remained in use in some units and contexts due to its long reach and penetrating power. It was a simple but effective weapon designed to keep enemies at bay and deliver lethal thrusts in tight formations. The hasta's design influenced later Roman spear developments and exemplifies how Roman military equipment evolved from earlier Italic and Etruscan traditions into the standardized, deadly arsenal of the legions. In addition to these weapons, the Romans were also experts in psychological warfare, and some weapons were designed to intimidate and demoralize enemies. For instance, certain sling bullets bore curses or frightening inscriptions aimed at unsettling foes. The Romans understood that war was fought not only with steel and fire, but also with fear and resolve. Weapons like the pilum, which rendered enemy shields useless, played into this psychological strategy, weakening the enemy's confidence before physical engagement. The combined effect of these brutal weapons was to create a highly versatile, adaptive, and lethal fighting force that could respond to a wide variety of threats and battlefield conditions. Whether throwing pila to break enemy shields, stabbing with the gladius in close combat, or launching volleys of plumbati and sling stones to harass from afar, Roman soldiers had the tools and training to dominate opponents. Their equipment was not just a collection of weapons, it was a carefully engineered system designed to maintain tactical superiority and ensure victory. As we reflect on these brutal Roman weapons, it becomes clear that their power came not just from their design, but from the discipline and skill of the soldiers who wielded them. The weapons were extensions of the legion's collective strength, each soldier playing a role in the larger machine of war. This integration of technology, tactics, and training made the Roman legions one of history's most formidable military forces. Their brutal arsenal was a key factor in shaping the course of Western civilization, allowing Rome to build and maintain an empire that lasted for centuries. The Roman military arsenal also included the cataphractarii and cataphract-style cavalry weapons, which, although not the primary armaments of the legionaries, played a significant role in Roman warfare as mounted units evolved. These heavily armored cavalry units wielded long lances and swords, designed for charging and breaking enemy lines with devastating impact. The lance, often called the contus, was a long, two-handed spear that could deliver powerful thrusts from horseback. This weapon allowed cavalry to strike with enormous force and penetrate enemy shields or formations, making Roman cavalry a crucial component in both offensive and defensive maneuvers. Over time, as enemies such as the Parthians and Sarmatians challenged Rome with their own mounted forces, Roman cavalry adapted their weaponry and tactics, incorporating heavier armor and longer lances to match their adversaries' ferocity. Another brutal weapon used by some Roman troops was the mace, a blunt force weapon capable of delivering crushing blows. Though less common than swords or spears, maces were effective against armored opponents, as their impact could dent or bypass metal armor and cause internal injuries. The mace symbolized a shift in some Roman combat tactics towards close-range, blunt trauma warfare, which was particularly useful in sieges or fighting heavily armored enemies. The design varied from simple wooden clubs reinforced with metal bands to more elaborate, spiked iron heads. Maces represented the versatility of Roman soldiers, who could adapt their fighting style and weapon choices depending on the enemy and battlefield conditions. Throwing axes, or Francisca-style weapons, were occasionally adopted by Roman auxiliaries, especially those from northern provinces where such weapons were common. These throwing axes added a terrifying element to Roman combat, as they could be hurled at enemy ranks to disrupt formations or injure key soldiers before the main battle ensued. The sharp, weighted blades of these axes allowed them to spin in flight, increasing their impact force. Although not a standard issue for legionaries, these weapons demonstrate how Rome incorporated diverse fighting styles and weapons from the many peoples within its vast empire, turning potential threats into military assets. In the brutal environment of the Roman battlefield, soldiers also relied heavily on their helmets, which were as much weapons of defense as symbols of Roman power and discipline. The galea, the typical Roman helmet, was crafted from bronze or iron and featured cheek guards and a neck guard to protect vital areas. Some helmets were adorned with crests made of feathers or horsehair, serving not only to intimidate enemies but also to help commanders identify ranks and units amid the chaos of battle. The helmet's sturdy construction was critical in close combat, where a single blow to the head could mean death or incapacitation. The protection afforded by the galea allowed Roman soldiers to fight with confidence and resilience. Besides individual weapons and armor, Roman soldiers also utilized siege weapons that, while not carried into hand-to-hand combat, were essential for breaking enemy defenses and gaining control of fortified cities. Alongside the ballista, Romans employed the onager, a powerful catapult designed to hurl massive stones or incendiary projectiles over walls or into enemy camps. The onager's destructive power was terrifying. It could demolish fortifications, create breaches in walls, and cause panic among defenders. These siege engines required skilled operators and careful coordination, underscoring the Romans' mastery of engineering and combined arms tactics. The effectiveness of such weapons in prolonged sieges was a key factor in Rome's ability to expand and hold its vast territories. The versatility of Roman weapons extended even to more specialized troops, such as the velites, light infantry skirmishers who carried small shields, javelins, and sometimes slings. These troops were vital for reconnaissance, harassment of enemy formations, and quick strikes before the main legion engaged. Their weapons were lighter and designed for mobility, allowing them to throw javelins like the verutum or hurl sling stones with deadly precision. The velites' role showcased the Romans' ability to combine different troop types and weapons into a cohesive, flexible fighting force capable of adapting to diverse combat scenarios. Another aspect of Roman military might was their use of the cullius, a large siege net used to capture or immobilize enemy soldiers during close quarters, combat, or assault operations. While not a weapon in the traditional sense, the cullius demonstrated Rome's inventive approach to warfare, combining brute force with tactical ingenuity. These nets could trap enemy combatants, making them easy targets for swords or spears. The use of such devices highlights how Roman soldiers and engineers constantly sought ways to gain the upper hand in battle, using every tool at their disposal to dominate opponents. Roman soldiers' training also emphasized the effective use of entrenchments and field fortifications. Before battles, they often constructed trenches, ditches, and palisades to protect camps or control enemy movements. These defensive works, combined with their brutal weaponry, made Roman legions nearly unbeatable in many engagements. The integration of weapons, armor, tactics, and engineering created a comprehensive military system that few enemies could overcome. As the Roman Empire expanded, it faced new enemies with different fighting styles, prompting further evolution of weapons and tactics. For instance, encounters with heavily armored cavalry like the Sarmatians and Parthians influenced Roman spear designs and cavalry tactics, while guerrilla warfare in provinces like Britannia and Germania required lighter, more flexible weapons and strategies. This adaptability was a hallmark of Roman military success, ensuring their brutal weapons remained effective across centuries and continents. In conclusion, the arsenal of brutal weapons wielded by Roman soldiers was not merely a collection of deadly tools, but the foundation of a military system defined by innovation, discipline, and adaptability. From the gladius and pilum to siege engines and cavalry lances, each weapon played a specific role in a carefully orchestrated strategy of domination. The integration of these weapons into formations, combined with rigorous training and tactical brilliance, allowed Rome to build one of the most powerful empires in history. Understanding these brutal weapons offers insight not only into ancient warfare, but also into the mindset of a civilization that shaped the modern world through conquest and control. While the gladius and pilum often dominate discussions about Roman weaponry, the Roman legions were equipped with an arsenal that went far beyond these staples, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of battlefield demands and enemy tactics. One such weapon was the hasta, an early Roman spear that predates the pilum but remained in use throughout much of Roman military history. The hasta was longer than the gladius, typically around 6 to 7 feet, and was primarily a thrusting weapon rather than a throwing spear. Its length gave soldiers a reach advantage in formation fighting, allowing them to strike enemies before they could get close. While eventually overshadowed by the pilum and spiculum, the hasta remained valued in certain units and situations where its reach and penetrating power could dominate. This spear was simple, sturdy, and brutally effective. Just the kind of weapon a disciplined Roman soldier would trust in the heat of battle. Another key weapon in the Roman soldier's deadly toolkit was the pugio, a small but fearsome dagger. Though often overshadowed by larger weapons, the pugio was a vital sidearm for close combat and survival. Designed for quick, stabbing attacks, it was used when the battle closed in and the soldier's primary weapon was lost, broken, or impractical. What made the pugio especially brutal was its accessibility in tight spaces and its sharp, double-edged blade that could cause fatal wounds swiftly. Beyond its utility, the dagger also held symbolic value as a mark of a soldier's readiness to fight and die for Rome. In many ways, the pugio was the Roman warrior's personal last resort, a compact weapon that could turn the tide in moments of desperation. Beyond individual melee weapons, the Romans excelled at incorporating ranged weaponry to soften enemy ranks before close combat. One such weapon was the plumbata, a weighted throwing dart that soldiers carried in bundles attached to their shields or belts. These darts were small but deadly, capable of piercing armor and shields when thrown with accuracy. The plumbata extended the legionaries' offensive reach beyond the pilum, allowing them to harass enemy formations from a safer distance before the melee began. This versatility added an extra layer of lethality to the Roman infantry, showing how they combined different weapons to disrupt and overwhelm foes. Complementing the plumbata was the scorpio, a smaller version of the ballistae artillery piece. Unlike handheld weapons, the scorpio was operated by specialized soldiers and engineers, launching bolts or large arrows with remarkable precision over long distances. This siege engine was especially useful in battles and sieges where breaking enemy lines or fortifications from afar was crucial. The terrifying speed and power of scorpio bolts could pierce armor, kill horses, and sow panic within enemy ranks. The psychological impact of such artillery was enormous. Hearing the whistling bolts and the crashing impact would often shake the morale of opposing troops, sometimes even before the Romans themselves engaged. Roman soldiers were also experts in using their defensive gear offensively. The scutum, the large rectangular shield, was a cornerstone of Roman battlefield tactics. Beyond its obvious role as protection, the scutum was a weapon in itself. Its heavy wooden frame and curved design allowed legionaries to bash and shove opponents, breaking enemy formations or creating openings for a lethal gladius thrust. In the famous testudo tortoise formation, soldiers interlocked their scuta overhead and on the sides, creating an almost impenetrable shell of wood and metal. This formation was instrumental in protecting troops from enemy projectiles and advancing steadily under heavy fire, embodying the Romans' relentless, disciplined approach to warfare. As warfare evolved, so did Roman weaponry. The spiculum is a prime example of this evolution. Emerging in the later Roman Empire, the spiculum blended features of the pilum and the hasta. It was a versatile spear, used both for throwing and thrusting, adapting to the increasingly varied threats the legions faced. With a stronger shaft and a broader, more penetrating spearhead, the spiculum was effective against both infantry and cavalry, proving the Romans' ability to innovate and respond to new tactical challenges. This adaptability helped the Roman military maintain its edge, even as the nature of warfare shifted dramatically in the centuries before the empire's decline. Armor was just as crucial as weapons for Roman soldiers, and one of the most famous pieces was the lorica segmentata, a segmented plate armor that offered excellent protection while allowing freedom of movement. Made from overlapping strips of iron fastened together, it shielded vital areas without weighing soldiers down excessively. This armor was a significant technological advancement compared to earlier chainmail or leather options. The balance it provided between defense and mobility was essential for the close-quarters combat that Roman soldiers frequently faced. Wearing this armor, a legionary could confidently engage multiple enemies, trusting in both his weapon and his protection. Another brutal weapon worth mentioning is the mace, a blunt force weapon not commonly associated with Roman infantry, but nonetheless used by some units, especially cavalry or auxiliary troops. The mace's power came from its ability to crush armor and cause devastating blunt trauma that could incapacitate enemies despite their protective gear. While swords and spears relied on cutting or piercing, the mace delivered bone-shattering blows that could break shields and helmets. This weapon's presence shows the Romans' willingness to diversify their armory and tactics, incorporating blunt weapons alongside cutting and thrusting arms to meet all battlefield needs. Additionally, Roman auxiliaries, non-citizen troops often recruited from conquered or allied peoples, sometimes wielded specialized weapons like throwing axes similar to the Frankish Francisca. These small axes could be hurled to disrupt enemy formations or wound soldiers before close combat. The axes' spinning flight increased their impact force, making them deadly when thrown accurately. Though not standard for legionaries, their use illustrates how Rome absorbed diverse military traditions from across its vast empire, turning potential foes into valuable assets. The galeia, or Roman helmet, was another essential piece of gear that combined protection with psychological impact. Made of bronze or iron, it covered the head with cheek guards and a neck protector. Some helmets were decorated with crests or plumes to signal rank or intimidate enemies. The galeia's sturdy design saved countless lives by preventing fatal blows to the head, allowing soldiers to fight longer and with greater confidence. The helmet was not just practical armor, but also a symbol of Roman discipline and identity on the battlefield. Roman warfare was not limited to handheld weapons and armor, but included siege engines like the ballista and onager. The ballista could hurl massive bolts or stones with incredible force and accuracy, devastating enemy formations or fortifications from a distance. The onager was a catapult, capable of throwing huge projectiles over walls or into enemy camps, breaking defenses and causing chaos. These machines required expert crews and careful coordination, but were critical for Roman success in prolonged sieges and large-scale battles, demonstrating Rome's mastery of engineering and combined arms warfare. Light infantry, such as the velites, used specialized weapons like the verutum, a light javelin, and slings to harass enemies and disrupt formations before the main legion advanced. Their mobility and ranged attacks complemented the heavier legionaries, adding flexibility to Roman tactics. Sling bullets sometimes bore inscriptions designed to intimidate or mock enemies, showing how psychological warfare was intertwined with physical combat. Roman soldiers also employed unconventional weapons like the gladius, a large siege net used to trap or immobilize enemy combatants during assaults. This device exemplified Roman ingenuity, combining brute force with tactical cleverness to gain an upper hand in close quarters. Training was key to maximizing the potential of this brutal and varied arsenal. Roman soldiers drilled constantly, learning not only weapon skills but also how to maintain formations, coordinate attacks, and adapt to changing battle conditions. This discipline transformed the weapons into extensions of the soldier's will and the legion's collective strength. Training was key to maximizing the potential of this brutal and varied arsenal. Roman soldiers drilled constantly, learning not only weapon skills but also how to maintain formations, coordinate attacks, and adapt to changing battle conditions. This discipline transformed the weapons into extensions of the soldier's will and the legion's collective strength. It was this combination of innovation, skill, and relentless practice that made the Roman legions an unstoppable force on ancient battlefields.